For coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page, if you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Get into, switch gears, talk about something that we have discussed quite a bit here on the Aaron Torres pod, and something that we specifically discussed on Monday's episode. So if you listen to Monday's episode, and really if you've listened to the last couple weeks, obviously the big story in college hoops has been the situation at West Virginia. You don't need me to tell you all of the details. Bob Huggins gets arrested. Bob Huggins resigns. They go through this weird thing where for a week they think they're going to get a legitimate candidate for the coaching job, even though I said day one they wouldn't. And then finally this past weekend, they decided that they were going to hire from within and hire an interim coach. Okay, cool. No big deal. Why do I bring it up? It is because in that process of doing all of those things, doing the nationwide search, only to realize that they weren't going to be able to get a guy that they wanted, a couple of their players entered the transfer portal. Now, on the one hand, a guy like Kirk Kriisa announces he's coming back. Good for West Virginia. They finally make the interim move, and they keep one of the most important pieces on their roster in Kirk Kriisa. But I bring it up because, as I said on Monday's show, there were a few players that have still decided to stay in the portal. Joe Toussaint is taking a few visits. I think Alabama was the one to most recently reach out. And on top of that, there was a guy named Tre Mitchell that, after entering the portal on Friday, was already planning to visit Kentucky this past weekend. And so I said, credit to West Virginia, glad they got their house in order, but they waited too long. And I said, I believe that Tre Mitchell, even though he obviously had the option to come back to West Virginia, I said, I believe that he was ultimately going to end up committing to Kentucky. His family has ties to John Calipari. He's from Pittsburgh. Calipari's from Pittsburgh, so the roots run deep. And he had already scheduled a visit to Kentucky this weekend. Said, I thought Kentucky was the favorite. Said, I thought he would ultimately land there. Well, on Monday afternoon, Tre Mitchell decided he didn't need to wait any longer, and he announces that he has, in fact, committed to Kentucky. So on the one hand, this is obviously not good news for a West Virginia squad that I believed was going to be in the top 25 to start the season if they retain their whole roster. But on a positive note, credit John Calipari again. Had guys like me, and I got to own it, criticizing him all spring. What is going on with this roster? What is going on? How are you going to fill this roster? June 1st, they had 7 scholarship players. They have since added 4 players, 2 veterans, and all of a sudden, I'm here to tell you, with the addition of Tre Mitchell on top of everybody else, this again looks like a top 8, 10, 12 team in the country, and one that can compete at the highest levels of the sport. Will they? I don't know, but I know they have the capability of doing so. So first of all, when it comes to Tre Mitchell, I really like his game. Now listen, he's not a put a team on your back and get you 22-11 kind of guy, but Kentucky doesn't need that. What they needed is exactly what he provides. 11.5 points per game at West Virginia, 5.5 rebounds, but also a guy that can space the floor as well. 34% three-point shooting. He's a guy who is a veteran, has done it, has been in college basketball for a while now, 2 years at UMass, a year at Texas before ultimately leaving in the middle of the season. And then this past year at West Virginia, where I really felt like he got comfortable. He was at home. He found a role in a coach and a program that fit him. And obviously it's unfortunate that of what happened at West Virginia, but also you talk about a great landing spot for him as well. You know, I'll tell you this is sometimes I spend way too much time talking about the impact of a player on a program, but for this player in specific, Tre Mitchell, it's kind of a perfect spot because obviously Kentucky has dealt with injuries in the front court. They're kind of thin. And so he is a plug and play. He is going to get his shots, his opportunities, his minutes, you name it. And more specifically, I believe that while it's a great fit for him, as I just said, I think it is a great, great, great fit for Kentucky. And most importantly, he fits 2 very, 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 very important needs for these 2023-2024 Wildcats. First of all, this team just desperately, desperately, desperately needed big bodies for the coming season. I've gone through this roster a few times. You don't need me to tell you all the details. But one, probably your most skilled big man, Aaron Bradshaw, 6'11", 7'1", somewhere in that range, freshman from New Jersey, unfortunately just underwent foot surgery just a few weeks ago. Now, the reports are that he could be back for the start of the season, and he probably expects to be back for the start of the season, but you just never know. Big guy, NBA draft prospect. You never want to rush a kid like that. So you just don't know if he'll be ready. Obviously, if the people around him, and we've talked about those people around him at his agency, the agency that represents him, how willing they will be or how excited they will be to rush him back, let alone play him at all. So yeah, Aaron Bradshaw's hurt. Agana Onyenso, I believe, is a developing big man, but is still more raw, toolsy, defense more than offense. So now you add a Tre Mitchell to the mix, who I believe, again, he's not a 22 and 14 guy, but can he get you 15, 16 a night in the SEC? I believe that he can, especially with the opportunity that will be provided of him. He's a guy that's going to get plenty of shots, plenty of opportunities, can stretch the floor, can play down low, can kind of hit that mid-range jumper. I really like who he is and how he fits and the need, again, for him on this roster. Beyond just the physical and skill needs, the other big thing, listen, we've talked about it all offseason. Kentucky needs some grown men in that locker room. And listen, I don't blame John Calipari for going back to the model that has gotten him success through the years, which is I'm going to bring in elite freshmen. It might not be pretty in November, but give me until February and March, and we're going to be peaking going into that tournament. It worked for him for pretty much from his first year at Kentucky, really even dating back to his Memphis days through the COVID situation of a few years ago. COVID was a disaster. 2022, he had a top 10 team all year. This year was kind of a mixed bag, and just a lot of stuff happened this year. But he decided to go back to that blueprint and that formula. But he still, even if you have elite players, and I believe they have upwards of 3 potential lottery picks in next year's draft, you still need those difference-making veteran guys. Those guys who have been in college basketball, understand what it takes, don't get too up, don't get too down. And now you add Tre Mitchell on top of the fact that you also returned Antonio Reeves just a few weeks ago. Antonio Reeves, of course, was a guy who averaged 14 points per game last year, was a guy who was one of the best players, I would argue one of the best guards in college basketball late in the season, 37 points against Arkansas and Fayetteville, 22 against Vanderbilt in the SEC tournament, 22 against Providence in the opening round of the NCAA tournament. And so now all of a sudden, I think you just literally added 14, something to the neighborhood. So Reeves averaged 14, Tre Mitchell averaged 11. It's not an exaggeration to say that at minimum, you just added 25 to 30 points in your starting lineup. And all of a sudden, you again have a team that is built to compete at the highest levels of college basketball. And so to me, that's probably the biggest takeaway. You add Reeves, you add Tre Mitchell on Monday. You added the 2 freshman role players, Jordan Burks, who I believe is a potential NBA player down the road 2 or 3 years, and Joey Hart, who the reviews are already coming in strong on him. You got yourself an interesting squad. And let me even take a minute and let me do the apology tour, right? Listen, one thing about me, I own when I get stuff wrong. And I don't know that I was wrong on Calipari. I think my frustration in April and May was a sentiment shared by Kentucky fans. You go into June again with 7 scholarship players. It's cause for concern. But credit to John Calipari, because in the last month, he rallied. Now, I understand part of it was because Bob Huggins got arrested, but listen, something was going to happen. Some opportunity was going to present itself, and something was going to become available to him. And credit to him for taking an obviously unfortunate situation at West Virginia, but saying, listen, if we don't move now, somebody else will, and we have to do what's best for this program, not sit around and wait for what West Virginia wants to do. And so after criticizing him for all of April and all of May, credit to Calipari for adding 4, I believe, players that will have impact this season. Tre Mitchell and Antonio Reeves, I believe, will both be starters for this year's team. And that's on top of, oh, by the way, what is already a great freshman class. And so listen, I get a lot of stuff wrong, but I also say this. I never had Kentucky as low as other people did, even in the darkest moments. I saw top 25s that didn't have Kentucky ranked at all. I said, wait a second now. I get that, yes, you want veterans, but also let's call a spade here, and let's acknowledge that when Kentucky steps on the floor, especially in February and March, when the games matter the most, they might have 2 or 3 of the most talented players in that game. DJ Wagner is going to be a lottery pick. Justin Edwards is going to be a lottery pick. And so you add those two. Hopefully you have Aaron Bradshaw back by the middle of the season. Rob Dillingham is a plug-and-play guy that is going to get his buckets, going to score. He's going to be a little bit out of control at times, but at the same time, he's going to be able to get you buckets when you need it. And, of course, Reed Sheppard, the 5th McDonald's All-American caliber player on this roster. Reed Sheppard was a McDonald's All-American. By technicality, Rob Dillingham wasn't, but you get the point. Is that 5th top 25 prospect. Listen, all of a sudden, I like this roster, and I like the lineups that you can now roll out. You could play Mitchell at the 5, the kid who just committed today, with a backcourt of either DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, and Rob Dillingham, DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, and Reed Sheppard. You can go big and play Ogana Onyenso at the 5. You can also hopefully get Aaron Bradshaw back and maybe play him at the 4 and Mitchell at the 5, whatever it is. But now you have veterans, you have versatility, and you have guys that can put the ball in the basket with just about anybody in college basketball. So I'm not saying that this move today makes Kentucky the favorite and print up the 40-0 t-shirts. That's not what I'm saying at all. But as of about 3 weeks ago, it looked like Kentucky was going into the season completely undermanned. And now all of a sudden I see a team, I don't know if night 1 when they play Kansas early in the season in the Champions Classic. I don't know if night 1 it's going to be great, but give it till January, give it till February, certainly in March. I believe you'll see a team that's ready to compete with just about anybody.